The day Grandpa's will was read, my family arrived dressed like they were attending the opening of a luxury resort instead of a funeral. My father was practically glowing with excitement. He spent the entire morning talking about the sports car he planned to buy with his inheritance, despite the minor detail that nobody actually knew what Grandpa had left behind. Grandpa had always been a strange old man. He spent most of his life collecting things nobody else wanted. Rusty tools, broken appliances, outdated gadgets, and enough random junk to fill several warehouses. The rest of the family considered him eccentric. I considered him entertaining. When the lawyer finally opened the will, the room became so quiet you could hear people breathing. The silence lasted exactly 3 minutes. Then everything exploded. It turned out Grandpa wasn't secretly rich. He wasn't hiding gold bars. He didn't own vacation homes. Most of his savings had been spent years earlier traveling and enjoying retirement. My father looked like someone had unplugged his soul. The lawyer continued reading. My aunt received a collection of antique furniture. My cousins inherited various collectibles. My father inherited several storage units full of Grandpa's belongings. Then came my turn. I inherited Grandpa's old house. Calling it a house was extremely generous. The place looked like a tornado had signed a long-term lease. The roof sagged. The paint was peeling. Half the windows looked older than civilization itself. The lawyer then handed me a rusty metal toolbox. Inside sat a single $10 bill. That was it. One house that looked condemned and $10. The room erupted with laughter. My father laughed hardest. "I knew your grandfather loved practical jokes," he said between wheezes. $10! That's incredible! A cousin nearly fell out of her chair laughing. Another relative asked if I planned to retire with my fortune. For weeks afterward, Dad refused to let it go. Every time he saw me, he had a new joke. "Careful carrying all that wealth around. Don't spend the entire $10 in one place. Maybe you can buy half a sandwich." Even I had to admit it was ridiculous. A month later, I finally drove out to inspect the property. The house sat on the edge of town surrounded by weeds and neglected fencing. Looking at it in person somehow made it appear even worse. I unlocked the front door. The hinges screamed like they were reporting a crime. Dust coated nearly everything. Boxes filled every room. Old furniture leaned against walls. Strange mechanical devices sat in corners. I spent hours sorting through decades of accumulated junk. Grandpa apparently never threw away anything. I discovered 6 broken radios, 3 typewriters, a machine that might have been a blender or a weapon, and enough rusty screws to build an entire bridge. While digging through one of the drawers, I found a folded piece of paper. The handwriting was unmistakably Grandpa's. I opened it. It contained only a single sentence. "Sometimes the smallest things are worth the most." I stared at the note. Then I laughed. "Sure, Grandpa." I pulled the $10 bill from my wallet. It looked completely ordinary. Old. Wrinkled. Worth exactly $10. At least as far as I could tell. I shoved it back into my pocket and continued cleaning. A few hours later I stepped outside for fresh air. That's when I noticed movement next door. A moving truck had parked at the neighboring property. Several workers were unloading furniture while a woman directed them. She was unlike anyone I'd ever seen. Tall, confident, and incredibly attractive, she carried herself with effortless grace. Her unusual silver-tinted eyes instantly caught my attention. She glanced toward my property, looked at the mountain of trash piled beside the house, then looked back at me. "Excuse me," she called. "Yeah?" She pointed toward the junk pile. "Is this the town landfill?" For a moment I couldn't answer. Then I burst out laughing. "No. That's my inheritance." She blinked. Then she laughed too. Unfortunately, I laughed so hard I stepped backward into a rusty wheelbarrow and nearly knocked myself unconscious. An excellent first impression. As she continued laughing, I couldn't help smiling. For the first time since Grandpa's funeral, inheriting that terrible old house didn't seem quite so unfortunate. Over the next few weeks, the old house slowly transformed from a disaster zone into something that almost looked habitable. I spent every spare hour hauling away junk, repairing broken boards, and trying not to fall through the floor. The best part wasn't the work. It was the company. The woman next door seemed to appear whenever I was about to tackle a difficult project. She introduced herself as Zara and quickly became my favorite part of the day. She claimed her family had relocated from a distant colony world several years earlier. I didn't understand half of the things she talked about, but listening to her explain alien customs was endlessly entertaining. Apparently, in her culture, giving someone a defective household appliance was considered a marriage proposal. I spent 3 days worried I'd accidentally proposed after lending her an old toaster. The house continued revealing Grandpa's bizarre collection of treasures. One afternoon, Zara and I opened a wooden crate labeled Emergency Defense Equipment. Inside we found 37 rubber chickens. Neither of us could explain it. Another box contained homemade alien detectors constructed from kitchen timers and flashlight parts. A third contained dozens of notebooks documenting Grandpa's theories about interstellar squirrels. The man had clearly been operating on a different level than the rest of humanity. Meanwhile, Dad continued his campaign of mockery. Every Sunday he arrived uninvited. Every Sunday he found a new way to joke about my inheritance. "How's retirement going, millionaire? Need help investing that $10? I saw a candy bar on sale. Thought you might finally afford it." Then came the afternoon everything changed. I was cleaning the workshop while Zara sorted through old papers. She found the $10 bill sitting beneath a stack of documents. "You still have this?" she asked. "Of course. It's my entire inheritance." She examined it carefully. Her eyes narrowed. "Interesting. What? In my culture, old currency with unusual serial numbers can become valuable collector items." I laughed. "This thing is worth $10. Maybe." The way she said it made me curious. A few days later, we attended a regional collectibles event taking place downtown. Hundreds of collectors had gathered to buy and sell rare coins, stamps, and currency. Mostly, I wanted an excuse to spend time with Zara. The bill was an afterthought. We approached a booth operated by a respected currency expert. The elderly collector accepted the bill with barely any interest. Then he looked at the serial number. His expression changed immediately. He adjusted his glasses. Looked again. Adjusted them a second time. Then a third. "Where did you get this?" he asked. I suddenly felt nervous. "My grandfather." The collector stood so quickly his chair nearly tipped over. People nearby turned toward us. The man grabbed a magnifying lens. His hands actually trembled. "What is it?" I asked. The collector stared at me like I'd just walked in carrying a treasure chest. "This can't be real." More people gathered. Someone pulled out a phone. The collector continued examining the bill. Finally, he looked up. "Young man, do you understand what you have here? A $10 bill?" The crowd laughed. The collector didn't. "This serial number contains one of the rarest printing errors ever documented." My heart skipped. "What does that mean?" "It means collectors have searched decades for something like this." The room suddenly became very quiet. The collector named a number. I thought I heard him wrong. Then he repeated it. The estimated value wasn't hundreds. It wasn't thousands. It wasn't even hundreds of thousands. It was potentially worth millions. My knees nearly stopped working. Beside me, Zara looked just as stunned. Before I could process the information, another familiar voice echoed from behind the crowd. "Millions?" I turned. Dad stood frozen in place. Apparently he'd been attending the same event. For the first time in my entire life, I watched every trace of confidence disappear from his face. His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. No sound came out. The man who had spent weeks laughing about my $10 inheritance suddenly looked like someone had been hit by lightning. As collectors rushed forward asking questions and requesting photographs, I realized Grandpa's strange note might not have been a joke after all. Sometimes the smallest things really were worth the most. And judging by Dad's expression, he had just figured that out too. The moment experts officially authenticated the $10 bill, my life turned into a comedy show that nobody warned me about. Within days, local news stations were calling. Collectors were emailing. Reporters were showing up outside the house. People who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly remembered my phone number. The most dramatic transformation belonged to my father. The man who had spent weeks laughing at my inheritance now acted as if we'd always been best friends. His first attempt was subtle. He showed up carrying coffee and donuts. "Thought I'd help you with the renovations," he said with an awkward smile. I nearly dropped my hammer. Dad helping with manual labor was like seeing a shark become a vegetarian. Suspicious didn't even begin to describe it. His second attempt was worse. A few days later he organized what he called a family appreciation dinner. Nobody had appreciated family this much until the bill became worth millions. The evening quickly turned ridiculous. My aunt stood up and delivered a 10-minute speech about how Grandpa had been her hero. Unfortunately, she accidentally called him by the wrong name twice. One cousin claimed Grandpa taught him everything he knew. Grandpa had spent most of his life trying to avoid that cousin. Another relative suddenly discovered dozens of childhood memories involving Grandpa. The stories became more heroic every time she told them. By dessert, Grandpa apparently had single-handedly saved civilization. The entire performance felt like a competition to see who could rewrite history the fastest. Meanwhile, the old house continued improving. Zara spent nearly every afternoon helping me clean, repair, and organize the property. Working together felt effortless. We laughed constantly. One evening we discovered a locked storage room hidden behind a stack of shelves. Inside were dozens of unfinished inventions. Most of them made absolutely no sense. One machine appeared designed to automatically butter toast while simultaneously playing patriotic music. Another looked capable of launching garden vegetables into low orbit. We laughed so hard we nearly cried. The more time I spent with Zara, the more difficult it became to imagine my days without her. She was intelligent, funny, and somehow capable of making even demolition work enjoyable. One night we sat on the front porch watching the sunset after a long day of repairs. The property finally looked less like a junkyard and more like a home. "You know," she said, "humans are strange." "Only humans?" She smiled. "You inherited a broken house and a single $10 bill. Not my greatest moment. Most people would have quit." I shrugged. "Grandpa mattered to me." She looked at me for several seconds. "That's exactly why he chose you." Her words stayed with me. Unfortunately, peace never lasted long around my family. A week later, one of my cousins attempted something spectacularly stupid. He somehow acquired a fake $10 bill and tried switching it with the original during a family gathering. His plan lasted approximately 30 seconds. The fake bill literally had the wrong portrait printed on it. Even Dad looked embarrassed. Another relative proposed a business partnership involving luxury pet hotels. A third wanted me to invest in imported anti-gravity fitness equipment. None of them could explain what anti-gravity fitness equipment actually was. Dad became increasingly desperate. He volunteered to repaint the house. He offered financial advice. He even suggested we start spending quality father-son time together. This from the man who previously communicated mostly through sarcasm. The funniest part was watching everyone pretend their motives were pure. Nobody mentioned the money directly. They didn't have to. The greed practically glowed. As the auction date approached, interest in the bill exploded worldwide. Collectors competed for opportunities to view it. Experts published articles. Offers arrived almost daily. Each new number seemed more unbelievable than the last. Through all the chaos, Zara remained the only person who treated me exactly the same. She never cared about the bill. She cared about me. And for the first time since Grandpa's death, I began to suspect that the old man had planned every bit of this. Not just the inheritance. Not just the bill. The entire lesson. The junk house was becoming valuable because someone cared enough to restore it. And maybe Grandpa knew the same thing could happen to people. Especially the ones everyone else underestimated. The day of the auction felt unreal. Just a few months earlier, I had inherited a collapsing house, a rusty toolbox, and a $10 bill that everybody laughed at. Now collectors from around the world were competing to own that same piece of paper. The auction hall was packed. Experts filled the front rows. Reporters crowded the back. Cameras pointed toward the display case holding the bill. I sat quietly beside Zara while trying to convince myself this wasn't some elaborate dream. My father sat 3 rows behind us. Judging by his expression, he still hadn't fully accepted reality. The bidding started high. Then it climbed higher. Within minutes, numbers that once sounded impossible were being thrown around like pocket change. Each new bid triggered gasps from the audience. My heart pounded harder every time the auctioneer raised the amount. Dad looked increasingly pale. At one point he actually loosened his collar. By the time the final bids arrived, the room was completely silent. Then the auctioneer slammed the gavel. Sold. The final amount was so large that my brain refused to process it for several seconds. Life-changing didn't even begin to describe it. The audience erupted into applause. Reporters rushed forward. Collectors congratulated me. Meanwhile, Dad looked like he had just watched a winning lottery ticket float away in the wind. The funniest part came afterward. While organizing the remaining contents of Grandpa's toolbox, I discovered a hidden compartment I had somehow missed. Inside was another folded letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. I opened it carefully. The message was short. Grandpa wrote that money reveals character faster than anything else. He explained that everyone in the family would chase obvious wealth. That was why he hid his greatest gift inside something everyone would overlook. Then came the part that hit me hardest. He said I was the only grandchild who regularly visited him without asking for anything. The only one who listened to his stories. The only one who treated him like family instead of an opportunity. The bill wasn't random. The house wasn't random. None of it was. Grandpa had been testing people the entire time. And according to his final letter, the test had worked perfectly. A few days later, I hosted a celebration at the renovated property. The transformation amazed everyone. The once abandoned junk house now looked beautiful. Fresh paint covered the walls. The yard was landscaped. The workshop had been restored. Many of Grandpa's strange inventions were displayed as decorations. My favorite remained the automatic toast buttering machine. Nobody understood how it worked. Nobody trusted it. Yet everyone loved it. Naturally, Dad chose the party to make one final attempt. He pulled me aside and launched into a speech about family, forgiveness, second chances, and the importance of sharing success. It might have been convincing if he hadn't spent the previous 3 months trying to attach himself to my inheritance. Before I could respond, several relatives wandered close enough to overhear. The conversation quickly became awkward. Especially when multiple people reminded Dad about the jokes he made after Grandpa's funeral. Someone even repeated the "half a sandwich" comment. The entire group burst into laughter. Dad's face turned bright red. For once, he had absolutely nothing to say. Later that evening, as music played and guests enjoyed themselves, I stepped onto the porch for some fresh air. Zara joined me. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and orange. For a moment neither of us spoke. We simply looked out across the property that had changed both our lives. "Your grandfather was smarter than everyone realized," she said softly. "He definitely had a strange sense of humor." "That too." We laughed. Then she slipped her hand into mine. The simple gesture somehow meant more than the auction, the money, or the attention. For months she had stood beside me through every challenge, every joke, and every disaster. Before I could say anything, she leaned forward and kissed me. Cheers immediately erupted behind us. Apparently several guests had been watching. I made a mental note to install curtains. The celebration continued late into the night. As I looked around at the restored home, my friends, and the woman beside me, I realized Grandpa's greatest gift had never been the money. The fortune changed my circumstances. The house taught me patience. The experience revealed people's true colors. And somehow, in the middle of all that chaos, I found a future worth building. As for Dad, he still tells people the bill's value was pure luck. Of course, he usually says this while standing in the house he mocked, looking at the life he laughed at, and remembering the $10 inheritance that turned out to be the most expensive joke he ever made. Grandpa would have loved that ending,